Hare Krishna. Today we are going to revise chapter number 4 titled Transcendental Knowledge. And before we do that, let's do the Mangalacharan and seek a blessing from our Gurudev so that we can repeat whatever we have learned from him. Vande Shri Guru Shri Yutpat Kamlam Shri Gurun Vaishnavascha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagan Raghunathamisham Tasajivam Sadvaitam Savdhutam Parijan Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagan Lalita Shri Vishakha Savintashcha Om Agyantrimandansya Gyanancha Shalakya Chakshurunnulentam Yen Tasmai Shri Gurve Namah हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीन बंधु जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमस्तुते नमो महावदन्याय कृष्ण प्रेम पदायते कृष्णाय कृष्ण चैतन्य नामने गौर विषय नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसादि गौर भक्त वृंदा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे First of all, my Danvat Pranam to my Diksha Guru Shri Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj Ji, and then my Danvat Pranam to my Shiksha Guru and to all the listeners in this audio and the video who will be listening to it after this recording is done. So let's see the connectivity with the previous chapter of this chapter number 4. In the previous chapter, in the chapter number 3, titled Karma Yoga, Shri Kishan Bhagwan Ji had summarized towards the end that transcendental knowledge is very, very important in one's life. In returning back to Godhead, transcendental knowledge helps a lot. And though he did glorify about transcendental knowledge in chapter number 3 towards the end, but he did not give the details. The details are being given in the chapter number 4 right now. In the previous chapter, he had touched upon many topics regarding transcendental knowledge, which led to the importance of transcendental knowledge. And some of these were that one can go from Sakam Karma Yoga to Nishkam Karma Yoga, and that is the steps he had explained how to go about it, and then how to withdraw oneself from the lusty desires, which are the source of a person who are forced to commit sins because of the desires, because of the lusty desires. So, how to control the senses? So, Krishna Bhagwan ji had explained about that towards the end of the chapter. This thing, and the other thing which he mentioned about transcendental knowledge was that to purify the consciousness from passion to goodness, and ultimately, precisely in chapter number in Shilok number 30, in chapter number 3, Shri Kishan Bhagwan ji had talked about surrendering to Krishna, and then do all your karma according to that. After being fully surrendered to Krishna Bhagwan ji, and that is the stage to coming back to it in the Nishkam Karma Yoga. Now, in chapter number 4, Kishan Bhagwan ji starts with the transcendental knowledge, and let's see what Kishan Bhagwan ji has to say. There are in total 42 shloks in chapter number 4. In the first slok itself, Krishna Bhagwan ji mentions about the transcendental knowledge. What is the meaning of transcendental knowledge? Let's understand that. Transcendental knowledge means all the knowledge about Krishna Bhagwan ji, the knowledge which is beyond this material world, transcendent, right? Which is not connected, that knowledge which is not towards knowing about this particular planet. It is all about knowing Krishna Bhagwan ji, which is beyond this material world. So Kishan Bhagwan ji had mentioned in the shlok number 1 itself that this transcendental knowledge he had first given to sun god Vivaswan, and later Vivaswan gave it to the father of all the mankind, Manu, and then Manu gave it to Ikshvaku. Ikshvaku is in the Raghuvanshi dynasty in which Sri Ram was also born. So like this, the transcendental knowledge, that is the knowledge about Krishna Bhagwanji, was passed on from one generation to another generation to another generation, or what we call parampara. So this parampara went on for generations and generations and generations. But during the course of time, this parampara was broken. So, and Krishna Bhagwanji had to mention it again in the Kurukshetra battle to his Sakha, friend, and his devotee Arjuna. So that is the entitlement, who are entitled to receive this transcendental knowledge. That is a person who is a devotee of Krishna Bhagwanji as well as a friend of Krishna Bhagwanji. That was Arjuna. So that was the qualification of receiving the transcendental knowledge. Now, if you look around and deep into understanding about the transcendental knowledge as to why it was revealed to mankind, actually, if you go back at the time when the Srishti was created, when the universe was created by Shri Krishnji, at that particular time only this transcendental knowledge was revealed to sun god, and it had contained how to optimally live in this life journey of life and death, how to live a perfect life. So just like a manual is given when we buy any electronic goods or a new car or similar products, the manufacturer gives a manual along with it how to optimally use this equipment or a car or a electronic goods so that you can make the best out of the use of this particular gadget. Similarly, at the time of creating this universe, Shri Krishna had revealed the scriptures, Shastras, Vedas, and this knowledge so that the mankind could live a proper life, a peaceful life, a fearless life in this material world. So that was the need and the source of giving the transcendental knowledge. The whole purpose of this transcendental knowledge is to rediscover oneself and develop a relationship with God. So that is the purpose of the transcendental knowledge. And in this particular chapter, each and every shlok is very important, and we can try to understand and implement it in our part of our life. So we'll try to make an attempt to understand the details about it. So Keshan Bhagwanji then further had revealed about himself in shlok number 5 that in relation to the question asked by Arjun, that you are saying that you had revealed it to the Vivaswan, the god of sun, but that was thousands and thousands and billions of years ago. But you are standing before me now. How do I believe that you revealed the same knowledge to sun god a billion years ago? So here in shlok number 5, Krishna Bhagwanji states that many births both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subduer of the enemy. So this is what uh, Krishna Bhagwanji reveals to Arjun, that yes, I am the one who had revealed it. You do not remember it. I do remember it because I can remember all my previous births, but you cannot reveal anything about your previous born. And Bhagwanji then speaks about himself. He says, although I am unborn and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all living entities, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental body. And in the next slok, which is very, very, very popular and very prominent one, and Kishan Bhagwan ji says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanirabhavti bharatah abhudyanam adharmasya tadatmanam sarjam aham. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. And why do I descend myself? Why do I come on this planet Earth? This he explained in the next slok, number 8 of chapter 4. Pritrayanam sadhunam vinashayisha duskritam dharma samstapnarthaya sambhavani yuge yuge. To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, he comes, he says, for three purposes. Number one, to deliver the pious, to safeguard the sadhus, the people who are devotees, to safeguard them. That's the number one reason. Number two reason is the to annihilate the miscreants, to remove the miscreants. And third one is to re-establish the principles of a religion. So Bhagavanji says to deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants as well as to re-establish the principles of religion, I myself appear millennium after millennium. And then further Bhagavanji says, again, this is a very important shlok. I'll just read out for you. He says, Janma karam cha ma divyam evam yo veti tattvataha tyaktvaha deham punarjanmaha neti mam eti sa arjunaha. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activity does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but he attains my eternal abode. So it's very important that whoever understands this transcendental nature, he will not have to take the repeated cycle of birth and death. He will not have to undergo the repeated cycle of birth and death. And in Shlok number 10, Bhagwanji says, being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me, and taking refuge in me, many, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained a transcendental love for me. So in Shlok number 1 to 10, Bhagwanji talks about eternal education. That is just like a manual. He talks about that what importance is this transcendental knowledge in living one's journey. Then moving further in Shlok number 11 to 15, Krishan Bhagwanji talks about the accurate understanding of the transcendental knowledge. And here he talks about the Chaturvarnas, the demigods, and the fact that there is only one God. And he also talks about the fact that one who believes in Krishna Bhagwanji is the only person who can live a peaceful life. And whoever doubts, he is bound to live a miserable life. One should not doubt at all what is mentioned in our scriptures and what is mentioned in our Vedas and what Krishna Bhagwanji says, what Bhagavad Gita says. There should not be any doubt about it. So in Shlok number 11, he says, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects. Right? It is not that you just pray what you call casually to Krishna Bhagwanji and he will be very much pleased. No, there here in this talk he says, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. The way you do your bhakti, I will reward to you accordingly. The person who are very sincere, who have left all the material sense gratifications and enjoyments and are totally devoted to Krishna Bhagwanji, Bhagwanji has a different reaction to his bhakti. So everybody, whoever does bhakti Kishan Bhagwan Ji reciprocates in the same manner. Then further Bhagwan Ji says, men in this world desire success in fruitive activities and therefore they worship the demigods. Quickly, of course, men get results from fruitive work in this world. But instead of worshipping me, Kishan Bhavanji says, people and the devotees, they want quick results. Therefore, they worship demigods. Their desires are fulfilled by the demigods, but ultimately, all the boons are given by Kishan Bhagwanji only, and they are all of temporary nature. Worshipping the demigods, the result is very temporary. But if you worship Kishan Bhagwanji, the result is permanent. That is, you will be permanently living in Kishan Bhagwanji's abode and you will not have to undergo the repeated cycle of birth and death. Further, Bhagwanji says that he talks about the three modes of natures: Satyug, Satogun, Rajogun, Tamogun, goodness, passion, and ignorance. That the world is created and working according to these three gunas. He says, according to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. Four gunas, this is four varnas: the Brahman, the Shudras, the Vaishyas, and the what you call the people who are working in administration, etc. So these are the four types of varnas created by Krishna Bhagwanji. And although he says, I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am not the non-doer, being unchangeable. He himself is not governed by them. It is this thing. Okay. So this is the accurate understanding of the transcendental knowledge which Kishan Bhagwanji gives in slok number 11 to 15. Then from shlok number 16 to 23, Bhagwanji then elaborates and makes clarifications about working beyond the three gunas, working beyond goodness, passion, and ignorance. And that is Nishkam Karma Yoga. He talks about that, how to progress from Sakam Karma Yoga to Nishkam Karma Yoga. He talks about that, and Bhagwanji narrates about it, that one should ultimately not work for his own sense gratification. One should work only for the service of the Lord, for the pleasure of the Lord, and he should himself consume the results of his efforts only to the extent as are necessary to keep the body and soul together. So one should work for Nishkam Karma Yoga, and this is given in shlok number 19 to 23. So I'll just read out for you, and it says that you detach yourself from the material world and work towards the uh, Krishna Bhagwanji's um, services. In shlok number 19, it is mentioned, one is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker of for whom the reactions of work have been burnt up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Abandoning all the attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, such a person performs fruitive action, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. Such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, gives up all the sense of proprietorship. So these are the qualities. Then Bhagwanji talks about the qualities of a detached person. From shlok number 19 to 23, Bhagwanji talks about what are the symptoms of a detached person. So let's read out further. Bhagwanji says, he who is satisfied with gain, which comes of its own accord, who is free from duality and does not envy, who is steady in both success and failure, that is equanimity, is never entangled, although performing actions. The work of a man who is unattached to the modes of material nature and who is fully situated in transcendental knowledge merges entirely into transcendence. And finally, very important shlok number 24, Bhagwan Ji says, a person who is fully abundant in Krishna consciousness, a person who is totally engrossed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. So that is the removing the reactions of one's efforts. The Bhagwan Ji mentions about working in what is called a karma, that is beyond the three gunas, and then what are the symptoms of a detached person who is not attached to the sense gratifications, enjoyments of his senses in this material world. And lastly, Bhagwan Ji mentions about qualities of a detached person. Now, in the last section of this chapter number 4, and that is from Shlok number 24 to 42, Bhagwan Ji talks about sacrifices. That if you have to achieve anything, you have to do sacrifices. And the best sacrifice is the sacrifice of your ego. And that is by surrendering yourself that you know nothing, and you will be blessed by this knowledge of a Tattva Jnani Guru. That you go to a Guru, do services to him, surrender to him, ask for his mercy, ask for a knowledge from him, and that is the method of gaining transcendental knowledge. So there are two methods of gaining transcendental. One is what is mentioned in the shlok number 16 to 23, where Bhagwan Ji has mentioned what are the qualities of a detached person and what are the symptoms of a detached person and what are the qualities about a detached person. If one is not able to do all these things, then Bhagwan Ji gives another concession. He says, go to a Tattvajnani Guru. Tattvajnani meaning who knows the truth, who knows the Shastras very well, who has experienced God, who knows about God. Go to him, service him, surrender to him, and ask your questions to him. Please him. And when he is pleased, he will give you the truths. He will give you the transcendental knowledge. So that is about the sacrifices. And then Bhagwan Ji has also mentioned various types of sacrifices. This various types of sacrifices are given in Shlok number 26 to 29. So let me read them out to this thing. And then further Bhagwan Ji also talks about the purpose of sacrifices, yajna, or the whole purpose being to gain more and more knowledge, gyan. So Bhagwan Ji talks about these sacrifices in Shlok number 26 to 29. And here it says, some sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control, and others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. Some householders, they sacrifice their senses, meaning they control their senses, and then they do not enjoy any material objects. Only senses they divert to Kishan Bhagwanji's services. Then further he says, others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and senses offer the functions of all the senses and of the life breath as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. And this is mentioned more in detail in practicing Ashtanga Yoga, control of the mind. Further, Bhagwanji says, having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. So, whereas there are various types of uh, sacrifices mentioned over here, and all of them are very necessary depending upon the type of results that you want and what are the objects you are chasing. But that types of sacrifices are mentioned in slok number 26 to 29, the 29th being, still others are inclined to the process of breath restraint to remain in trance. Practice by offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming and the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. Others, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. So they are yogis who practice this transcendental knowledge of gaining more and more awareness about Krishna Bhagwanji, knowing more and more about the ways to reach the Golok Vrindavan Dham by controlling their breath and by controlling their intakes of the food, and they are doing various types of sacrifices. The Bhagwanji further says, without sacrifice, one can never, never, never live happily on this planet or in this life. What to talk of living a happy life in the next life? So sacrifices are very, very necessary, right? So as Bhagwanji mentions, the easiest way is to go to a Tattvajnani Guru, and that is mentioned in Shlok number 34 of Bhagavad Gita. Then in Shlok number 35 to 38, Bhagwanji talks about the glories of transcendental knowledge and what are the benefits of why is it necessary in living a good uh, what you call spiritual life, living a good and peaceful and fearless life, why sacrifices are necessary. And here he mentions, having obtained real knowledge from the self-realized soul, you will never fall again into such illusion. For by this knowledge, you will see that all living beings are but part of the Supreme, or in other words, that they are mind. Even if you are considered to be the most sinful of all sinners, when you are situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you will be able to cross over the ocean of miseries. So get yourself educated about transcendental knowledge, and no matter how sinful your past life has been, you will be able to cross the ocean of all the miseries through this transcendental knowledge. But ignorant and faithless persons who doubt the revealed scriptures do not attain God consciousness. They fall down. For the doubting soul, there is happiness neither in this world nor in the next. So do not doubt what is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, what is mentioned in the scriptures, what is mentioned in our Shastras and in the pious teachings of our acharyas and gurus. Because a person who is of the doubting nature, he will never find happiness either in this world or in the next world after death. And finally, in the last shlok, shlok number 42, Kishan Bhagwanji talks about, therefore, the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of the ignorance should be slashed by the weapon of knowledge. Again, Krishan Bhagwanji talks to Arjuna about remove your doubts with this weapon of knowledge, and armed with this type of yoga, stand up and fight. Live your life the way you are born as a Kshatriya, and that is to fight. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is about the transcendental knowledge about Krishan Bhagwanji. Transcendental knowledge is nothing but knowledge about Krishan Bhagwanji. Right? So, having learned this thing, we will now be proceeding to chapter number 5. So, stay tuned in and Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.